Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Jack, it's just an experiment. We have nothing to lose, only to gain. Emily waved the stack of papers enthusiastically, her brown eyes burning with excitement, like a child who'd just found the perfect present under the Christmas tree. She stood in the center of their living room, all worked up, as if she'd won a lottery ticket. Jack stared at her in silence. He'd just gotten home from work, hadn't had a chance to take off his jacket yet, and his wife was already running some kind of scam in front of him. He knew that look. It was the same fire she had when she'd made up her mind about something, and nothing could stop her. What are you talking about? What kind of experiment? She exhaled impatiently, as if she was too lazy to explain the obvious. It's a reality show, Jack. It's a new project. They're taking married couples and giving them a unique opportunity to work on their relationships. Work on their relationship. He frowned. Are we so fucked up that we need a show already? Emily crossed her arms over her chest, her lips tightening. You know yourself that we're not doing well. We've become strangers. We both work. We only see each other in the evenings. Intimacy has become more of a routine. This could shake us up. Jack slowly took off his jacket, threw it over the back of his chair, and took a glass of water, trying to digest what he'd heard. So, what? We're just going to be locked up in some house with cameras? Not exactly. She spoke quickly, clearly trying to keep him from immediately dismissing it. The point is, for a month, they're splitting us up and giving us new partners, like sort of alternate spouses. We spend time with them, do psychological exercises to, well, see if we're right for each other. Jack put the glass on the table. So we're just switching partners? Doesn't that seem a little crazy to you? It's a show, Jack. It's not real. Emily stepped closer, put her palm on his shoulder. People will be watching us, but you realize it's all within the format. It's just a way to spice up our relationship. Jack looked at her. Lately, he felt like they had really drifted away from each other. And now here was a reality show. Who even came up with such nonsense? Emily rolled her eyes. It's a new project from one of Netflix's top producers. Do you know what their ratings are? Millions of views. And we're not being forced to do anything. We're just participating in an experiment. Jack ran his hand over his face. I don't even know how to respond to that. Do you seriously want me to hang out with some stranger on camera for a month? It's not a party, it's a social experiment, she corrected him, and maybe it'll actually help us. Besides, she paused, wondering if she should say it now. They pay well. Jack chuckled. Of course they do. Now we're getting to the point. How much? She exhaled slowly, realizing she'd just used her greatest trump card. 100,000 each. Jack froze. 100,000. For a month. He worked in IT. The money was good, but 100 just for being on some weird show. It was tempting as hell. But there was something in the back of his mind. He didn't like the idea of it. It doesn't seem right, he muttered, looking at the papers. What's wrong? Emily leaned closer. Everything. This is some bullshit, Emily. This whole concept. It's obvious they want to make the show for the sake of scandal, for the sake of couples fighting, cheating, doing shit that can then be edited into viral videos. Jesus, Jack, you're overreacting. She waved it off irritably. It's just a show. There's no hidden meaning. It's not like we're signing a contract to cheat. He looked at her and saw the determination in her eyes. Emily had already made up her mind. You're going to do it anyway, aren't you? Even if I say no? She averted her gaze, but it was enough. He knew the answer. Damn it, Jack rubbed his temples. If I don't say yes, will you just say I'm a boring bore and go to the shoot alone? I wouldn't do that, she started, but not too confidently. He grinned. Of course you would. There was silence in the air. He knew he'd lost. Emily always got her way. Do you agree? Am I okay with some showrunner making clowns out of us? Well, I guess you are. Emily hugged him and pecked him on the cheek. You won't regret it. Jack stared at her back as she happily picked up the papers and scurried off to the bedroom. An unpleasant heaviness settled in his chest. Something about this didn't feel right, but he didn't know how much he would regret it. The filming began in a luxurious mansion specially equipped for the show. Cameras hung everywhere, in the bedrooms, in the kitchen, in the living room. Even in the bathroom, there were microphones catching every sound. There were producers, sound engineers, cameramen everywhere. Jack felt like a lab mouse trapped in a glass box. He was paired with Lily, a calm, polite woman of 35. No questions, no nerves. She didn't try to play artificial emotions like the other participants. She looked like an island of normality against the background of the general hype. The first evening they sat on the terrace, drank tea, and discussed books. Simple, casual. Jack felt comfortable. For the first time in a long time, he could just talk, not expecting barbs, not trying to figure out the subtext in other people's words. But every time he looked up, he saw Emily. She was with Daniel. He knew people like Daniel. Tall, tanned, with perfectly styled hair and his trademark white-hot smile, this guy literally radiated confidence. 33 years old, 1 million followers on social media, a successful business. The show's producers love these guys. Emily loved them too. She literally blossomed around him. For the first 2 days, Jack tried to ignore it. He kept telling himself that it was all just a show, that the producers created such situations on purpose. But with each passing day, the scenes in front of him became harder and harder to ignore. Emily laughed with him, tilting her head back, touching his arm as she sat with him by the pool, praising his every joke. Jack could see her looking at him with a twinkle in her that had disappeared from their marriage long ago. He understood this was what the producers expected from them. Ratings are built on scandals. If he exploded, if he made a scene, the show would get what it wanted. So he held back. But the more he held back, the worse it got. On the 4th day, the producers arranged an activity day, a class for each couple. Jack and Lily got a cooking class. They quietly cooked pasta, joked, but every few minutes his attention invariably returned to another couple. Emily and Daniel were given a dance. The music played loudly. Daniel led her in a confident, professional manner. He held her waist, she touched his shoulder. Their movements were smooth, perfectly synchronized. They laughed, leaned closer together, and then at one point Daniel lifted her in his arms and spun her in the air. The crowd of participants clapped. The cameras caught her gaze at that moment. Total happiness, a dazzling smile. And when Daniel lowered her to the ground, she didn't immediately unclasp her hands. Jack stood with a wooden face, a ladle of sauce in his hands. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked quietly. He nodded silently. But was everything okay? It only got worse after that. Emily stopped noticing him. She didn't even play the caring wife for the cameras. She disappeared from his life, dissolving into a new reality where he wasn't needed. And the producers fueled it. Every episode of the show featured clips of the couple's best moments. Jack was shown as aloof, withdrawn, boring. And Daniel and Emily? They shined. Viewers were supposed to see them as the new perfect couple. On the 8th day, when the filming of the official part was over, Jack went out to the courtyard for some quiet time. He sat down in a chaise lounge chair and took a deep breath. Just then, voices came from around the corner. "I've never been happier," Emily said. A second of silence. "I'm glad," Daniel replied. Jack closed his eyes. He realized everything. The weekend was supposed to be a respite. The producers decided to give the couple some personal time by allowing each contestant to spend 2 days away from the show's home. Jack thought Emily would come home like she used to. They'd be able to just talk off camera. Remember why they signed up for this farce in the first place. But instead, she's gone. She's renting a hotel room, one of the contestants said with a shrug. Jack froze. "Are you sure?" "Well, yes." The producers agreed that all the couples could spend the weekend however they wanted. Emily and Daniel got a room. Just to relax. Jack didn't know. He called Emily right away. Long, persistent. She didn't pick up. After a couple hours, when he was starting to lose patience, a message came through. "Stop. It's okay. It's just a format." The format. He sat in the empty show house, leafing through his phone, his fingers trembling. Jack wasn't paranoid. He'd waited patiently, turned a blind eye to their chemistry, didn't interfere when Daniel touched his wife a little too possessively. But the hotel room was another level. He waited for her to return. And when Emily entered the house, he was already standing at the door, arms crossed over his chest. "Where have you been?" She just rolled her eyes, tossed her bag on the couch, and walked past him, heading for the bedroom. "Jack, don't start. Where have you been?" He stepped after her. "At the hotel." "With Daniel?" "Yes." "And what were you doing there?" She turned around abruptly. "What are you asking me? Are you serious right now?" Jack stared at her, at the face he'd known for 10 years. It was different. There was a lightness about her, as if being around Daniel had taken away the weight she'd been carrying all this time. "You're not even trying to lie, are you?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, you're being overdramatic. It's part of the format. We just spent time off camera. In a hotel room?" "Yeah, in a hotel room." "Jesus, you realize how the show works, right? We have to keep the story going, build the plot. So, is this a show or your new life?" he asked quietly. She dropped her hands, looked at him with a kind of tired irritation. "Jack, why are you acting like this is a tragedy?" "Because I'm your husband, Emily. Or have you already forgotten?" She turned away, went to her suitcase, started rifling through her clothes without looking at him. "I need to change. Let's just close the subject, okay?" "No, it's not okay." He stepped forward, grabbed her arm. She froze but didn't pull away. "You slept with him?" She raised her head slowly. "You realize I can't answer that question." "Can't or won't?" "Jack." And then he realized that she didn't care anymore. That same evening, Jack walked out of the show house to get some air. He didn't know where to go. He just wanted to get away, disappear from the circus. But the producers had plans of their own. Daniel was standing in the courtyard. He didn't look embarrassed. Not at all. On the contrary, he smiled, as if it were nothing personal between them, as if nothing had happened that was worth worrying about. "Hey, Jack," he said, stretching. "Nice evening, huh?" Jack didn't answer. Daniel looked at him carefully, squinting his eyes. "Look, you know how things work. You're not stupid." "Yeah, I know how things work," Jack replied. "You're acting like you've already taken my place." Daniel chuckled. "That's not exactly true." "How is it?" He shrugged, tilting his head to the side. "No offense, Jack, but you just don't fit into her new world." Jack looked at him. The calm tone, confidence in every word. He wanted to punch him and watch his smug smirk disappear. But he knew that's what the producers were waiting for. So instead, he just turned around and walked away. The final episode of the show was supposed to be the final scene where all the couples would return to each other. That, at least, is what the producers promised. Reunion, open conversation, search for truth. Beautiful words behind which there was an obvious calculation. The rating of the show was at its peak. Millions of viewers were glued to the screens, waiting for the last act of this carefully planned drama. Jack sat in the dressing room in front of the mirror. He was wearing a gray suit, shirt with no tie. The producer of the show entered, smiled a strained professional smile, and checked the buttonhole on the lapel of his jacket. "How's the mood?" Jack didn't answer. She grinned and walked away, leaving him alone. Somewhere behind the wall, the final preparations were underway. The lighting guys were adjusting the spotlights. The sound guys were checking the microphone levels. He could hear people fussing, Daniel laughing in the next room, and, of course, Emily talking. With ease. With that same playful note in her voice that hadn't been in their house in years. A couple minutes later, an assistant came to pick him up, and he was led out into the studio. There were 2 couches upholstered in white fabric on a huge stage. Emily and Daniel were already sitting on one of them, relaxed, as if they hadn't participated in the dirtiest manipulation that could be passed off as an experiment. Jack sat down across from them. The spotlight was in his face. There was a huge live audience behind the host and producers, and cameras were everywhere. "Welcome to the final episode of Couples on Trial," came the cheerful voice of the host. "Today our participants will find out what this experience has meant to them. How do they feel after 4 weeks of the experiment? Were they able to strengthen their marriage, or did they come to new discoveries?" The crowd clapped, but Jack could hear his own heart beating in his temples. The host began with simple questions. How had he been feeling? How had the month gone? What conclusions did he draw? Jack answered calmly. Formal, but it was all a starter. And then the host turned to Emily. "Emily, what can you say about your experience? How do you see your life going forward?" She looked at him, then at Daniel, and was silent for a moment, as if choosing her words. Jack suddenly realized what was about to happen. She wouldn't just say it. She'd do it here. Emily sighed, folded her hands in her lap, and looked out at the audience. "I want to be honest." She took Daniel's hand. "This month has opened my eyes. I realize that I've spent my whole life trying to conform to expectations, following habits, but I can't anymore." Jack felt his fingers clench into a fist. Emily looked directly at him, with a strange expression in her eyes, a mixture of pity and confidence. Jack, you're a wonderful person. You've always been there for me, supporting me, but I can't pretend anymore. She paused, then continued. I filed for divorce. The audience gasped. Silence. He felt as if the air had been yanked from his lungs. A second. 2. 3. His ears rattled. What? He squeezed out, not recognizing his own voice. Emily held his gaze, but her hand was still in Daniel's. I filed the divorce papers, Jack. It's not a one-day decision. I've been thinking about this for a long time. The whole thing is just a show. But on this show, his wife just destroyed their marriage on live TV. Jack took a slow breath. He had to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. The crowd froze in anticipation. And then Daniel leaned forward and said, I love Emily. And the room erupted in applause. That was it. It was done. He had become a laughingstock in front of the entire country. After the show, the silence was harder on him than the embarrassment itself. Jack sat in his rented apartment he'd moved in right after he got back. His and Emily's house wasn't his home anymore. There was an empty bottle of whiskey on the table, and his phone vibrated with endless notifications, but he didn't touch it. He didn't go online, didn't watch television, didn't read the news. All he knew was the country was humming. He could feel it even through the walls. His life became a series of meaningless days. He would fall asleep in the morning and wake up in the afternoon, wander around the apartment, drink, fall asleep again. People went to work, walked in parks, discussed their problems, and he just existed, frozen in one moment, the very moment when the audience applauded his humiliation. But after a week, he couldn't take it anymore. His phone was on fire with messages. On Messenger, hundreds. On social networks, thousands. People were genuinely sympathetic, supportive. Jack, you deserve better. Brother, you were like a king. Don't worry. The whole country's on your side. Memes went viral across the internet. His face, with that very expression of shock, went viral. When you find out your wife left you for a blogger, when you paid $100,000 for your own humiliation, when your wife became part of the content, he didn't know whether to laugh or tear his hair out. But more importantly, journalists, producers, podcasters started writing to him. They called him for interviews, talk shows, streams. And at some point, he realized he had become popular. The first airings were difficult. He was sitting in front of the camera, and the hosts were asking questions that made everything boil inside. How did you feel at that moment? Did you know Emily was going to file for divorce? How do you feel about Daniel being with her now? Each time, he held back his anger, smiled, joked, pretended it didn't hurt. And the more he did it, the more his views grew. Soon he was asked to start his own show, a sort of breakdown of the reality industry. He didn't think it would work, but he said yes. And suddenly it worked. He talked about how the producers manipulate the participants, how the show does not just show people, but makes them characters, how he himself was molded into a boring husband, and Emily, a woman who found true love. His audience greedily absorbed every detail. He started getting paid for advertising. Big brands wanted to work with that Jack, and he made more money in 6 months than he had in his entire previous life. What about Emily? 2 months. That's exactly how long her perfect romance lasted. The news of the breakup made headlines. Emily and Daniel are no longer together. They gave interviews where they said that it turned out to be more complicated on the outside, and the experiment doesn't always carry over into real life. But no one cared, and Jack was on the crest of the wave. And now he was running the game. Jack sat in front of the camera, sipping his whiskey. The chat room was buzzing with discussion as viewers waited for more revelations about the reality show and his ex-wife. Well, I think it's clear, he grinned, looking at the screen. 2 months of true love, and that's it. What was left was a couple of Instagram posts and disappointment. The chat exploded with comments. Classic. Daniel just used her. Do an interview with her. What if she tells the truth? He was just about to close the stream when there was a knock on the door. Jack frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Guys, hold on a second, he said into the camera, then stood up and walked to the door. The lock clicked. Emily stood on the doorstep. She looked different. Hair damp from the rain, no makeup, jeans, and old sweater. Not a shred of that confident woman who shone on the show, basking in the attention of the crowd. "Hi, Jack." Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. He didn't say anything, just tilted his head to the side, waiting for an explanation. Emily looked around, as if checking to make sure no one was following her. "Can I come in?" Jack shrugged, took a step back, letting her inside. The audience in the chat room erupted. "What? Guys, did he keep the stream on? Oh, this is going to be interesting." Jack walked back to the table, sat down, but didn't turn off the camera. "What do you want?" Emily looked around the room hesitantly, clearly not noticing that the stream was still on. I'm sorry," she mumbled, interlocking her fingers. "You're sorry?" He grinned. "Is this a new PR stunt or genuine remorse?" She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, as if gathering her wits. "I screwed up, Jack. I ruined everything. Daniel turned out to be not at all what he seemed." "Yeah, tell that to everyone on the air," he muttered, taking a sip from his glass. The chat exploded with emoticons, the viewers frozen in anticipation. "He didn't turn off the stream. Hell, she doesn't even know. Let's hear it." Emily continued, unaware that thousands of people were watching this conversation in real time. "I was blinded by the attention, by the camera. I thought it was a chance to start over, to feel alive. But it was a mistake." "A mistake?" Jack smirked. "You make it sound like you just picked the wrong guy at the bar instead of humiliating me for the whole country." She swallowed. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. It's just, I needed to tell you that I realized it." "Yeah, it's about time." He nodded, lighting a cigarette. "Question. Would you have realized it if Daniel hadn't dumped you like yesterday's trash?" Emily blushed, but continued. "I don't want it to end like this." The chat was just ripping to shreds. "Who are you kidding, Emily? What doesn't she want? It's already over." "Jack, don't fall for it." Jack took a deep drag, looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Well, let's put it this way." He exhaled the smoke. "What do you want me to do? Go back? Start over?" Emily hesitated, her eyes full of hope. "I don't know. That's the problem." He grinned. "You always don't know." She swallowed. "Can we at least talk normally? Without the barbs?" Jack set the glass on the table. "Okay, let's be normal. I forgive you." Emily looked at him with relief, but he didn't let her savor this moment. "But now get the hell out of here." She froze. "What?" "I said get out." He raised an icy stare at her. "You've already had your screen moment. You squeezed everything you could out of me, and now you're hoping I'll get you up again?" "Jack." "No, Em." He stood up abruptly. "You wanted to be the heroine of the show? Congratulations. But, there are no writers in life who will fix your mistakes. You lost." The chat just exploded. "Bomb! That's a smash. Burn in hell, Emily." She clenched her teeth as if trying to hold back tears. "Do you really hate me that much?" Jack laughed. "Worse. I don't respect you anymore." Emily turned pale. She took a step back, as if she was just now realizing that she'd been kicked out of this life for good. She turned around, headed for the door. At the last moment, she turned around. Close that side." He cut her off. Emily walked silently out, and the door closed. He went back to his computer, put out his cigarette, and looked at the camera. "So, guys, back to the news?" The chat exploded. "Best stream ever. Bro, you're a legend. Pay Emily a percentage. This is her best content ever." Jack grinned. He hadn't just closed this chapter. He'd made it ranked. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.